so much information flying around, it can really feel like a chore just trying to figure out what's actually important.
It really can. Overwhelming sometimes.
Right. So that's what we try to do here. Take
Yeah.
a really focused look, a deep dive into key sources, pull out the crucial bits.
Give you a clearer picture without drowning you in data.
Exactly. And today, we're diving into something pretty significant and, frankly, quite concerning.
We're looking at Russian infiltration tactics, how they exert influence way beyond their own borders.
Our main source is this compelling report from Byline Times. It features these first-hand accounts from a Ukrainian unit they call the Elves.
Yeah, it's quite alarming stuff. And we've also got some expert analysis that gives broader context, answers some key questions raised by the report.
Perfect. So our mission today, really, is to get to grips with the urgent warnings coming from these Ukrainian officers.
What are the tactics? What's the bigger strategy we need to be aware of?
Exactly. Hopefully by the end, you'll have a much sharper sense of this, well, this complex situation.
Well, the main message from the Elves, it's pretty stark. They're saying Russia's been waging a hybrid war for decades.
Decades.
Yeah, and not just against Ukraine. It's global, targeting democratic societies everywhere.
And these guys, the Elves, they're seeing this up close.
Right on the front lines,
Oh.
witnessing it directly, that gives their perspective, considerable weight.
I'd say so. And they mentioned a quote, didn't they? From Vladislav Surkov.
Yes, the former Putin advisor. It really highlights the long-term thinking. He talked about the Russian world.
Right, existing wherever there's Russian influence, culture, information, military, economy.
Ideology, humanitarian stuff. He basically said it's always present to some degree. It's never totally absent. Suggests a very persistent, expansive goal.
Wow, that's ambitious.
Absolutely. The Elves even use this analogy like Tolkien's warriors. A fight of light versus darkness.
That really underlines the stakes, doesn't it? They see it as existential.
Completely. For them, it's about fundamental values, not just, some regional dispute.
Okay, let's dig into the how. The report says infiltration isn't new for the Kremlin.
Not at all. It's a long-standing tactic.
So can you give us a sense of the history? Like how it played out in Kherson, for instance?
Yeah, Kherson's a key example. They describe this two-stage infiltration process.
2 stages.
First wave, around 2001, you had these wealthy Russians showing up, claiming they were fleeing, criminal threats back home.
Okay. Plausible deniability, maybe?
Sort of. They set up businesses, bought property, and then gradually moved into local politics. Classic way to gain economic, then political, leverage, all under false pretenses, essentially.
So a slow burn, embedding themselves deliberately.
Precisely. And at the same time, they were cultivating long-term sleeper agents within Ukraine.
Sleepers, like Saldo, Volodymyr Saldo.
He's a prime example. Rose up in Kherson's construction industry back in Soviet times, then politics, multiple terms as mayor.
Right.
Then when Russia occupies Kherson in 2022, boom, they appoint Saldo head of the administration. Shows real long-term cultivation of assets.
That's quite a journey. And there was a second wave of recruitment mentioned.
Yep. Around 2010 to 2012, Russia had more oil money then.
Ah, okay.
So this wave was more focused on intel gathering, identifying influential people to recruit, and crucially, bribe. Building that internal network.
Getting inside the system.
Exactly. And it went deep, even into Ukrainian security services after the 2014 Crimea annexation. They recruited heads of the ATCs, the Anti-Terrorist Center.
The counterterrorism units, wow.
Yeah. And the SBU, Ukraine's main security service. There's this case of Ihor Sadohin protecting Kirill Strimisov, shows just how deep the penetration went.
It sounds like a systematic gutting of the very institutions meant to protect Ukraine.
Pretty much.
And it wasn't just individuals, right? The report mentioned businesses being used, too.
Oh, yeah. What the Elves call sophisticated legending. That's intel speak for creating a really believable cover story, a background.
So they can operate without suspicion.
Right. Like this Kyiv-registered security company that popped up in Kherson 18 months before the full invasion.
A security company.
Seemed legit. But under that cover, they were doing reconnaissance, moving personnel equipment, building their operational picture.
And the warning is that this isn't just happening in Ukraine.
That's the chilling part. The Elves are warning these tactics are absolutely being used across the West right now.
That is a concerning thought.
Okay.
The report also talks about weaponizing vulnerable groups. Refugees, for instance.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Well, sadly, people in precarious situations, like refugees, can be more susceptible to manipulation.
understandably.
The Kremlin sees them as a potential lever, you know? Their arrival can strain resources, shift public opinion in Western countries.
Create friction.
Exactly. But the report really zeroes in on the threat within Russian-speaking diaspora communities, EU, UK, US.
Because there's that existing cultural language.
Precisely. Easier to exploit. And they use this tactic called fake opposition.
Fake opposition.
Yeah, FSB agents posing as, like, persecuted political activists. They might even stage stuff back in Russia to look like they're being targeted.
Sure.
Then they seek refuge abroad, build networks within the diaspora, gather intel, gain credibility. Pablo Gonzalez, the journalist arrested in Poland, is mentioned as someone potentially trying this in Europe.
That is incredibly deceptive.
Mm.
Wow. The report also mentions this blurring of lines between crime and business, the Mafia state idea.
Yeah, it's just crucial. In Russia, especially since the 90s, the lines between legitimate business and organized crime, they're very blurred.
Okay.
Both often operate under Krisha, that's like protection, and the ultimate protector, the Kremlin, like a mafia boss.
So the state is essentially sanctioning, or at least enabling both.
In many ways, yes. It means businesses and criminal groups operate with state approval, explicit or tacit. It's quite different from how it usually works in the West.
Right.
So the MSB can place criminals and these quote-unquote businessmen abroad. Maybe they let them profit in Russia first, then stage some minor persecutions so they have a reason to leave.
Plausible deniability again.
Exactly. Their business success abroad provides cover, but illicit funds are flowing in, undermining the host country over time.
So these aren't just random criminals. They could be part of a bigger strategy.
That's the argument. And once they're established, they can then fund or support these Russian-founded public organizations.
Ah, another tool in the toolbox.
Definitely. Another key instrument.
Can you give an example? How do these organizations work?
Well, the report brings up Russian unity in Ukraine, set up before the Crimea annexation.
Okay, what do they do?
They push this narrative that the Donbas region was like the economic engine of Ukraine.
Was it?
Well, the reality was quite different. Donbas was actually heavily subsidized for years. State-owned coal mines cost way more to run than the price they sold coal for.
So the opposite of the narrative.
Exactly. But Russian propaganda flipped it, convinced locals their hard work was propping up the whole country. And the report says similar narratives are even tried on, say, miners' communities in the U.S.
Wow. Exploiting local grievances, twisting the facts.
That's the playbook.
What about the Imperial Palestine Society? That was mentioned too.
Yeah, founded way back in Tsarist Russia. It's another channel for influence, operates in occupied parts of Ukraine, but also Europe, Palestine.
And who runs it?
Since 2007, it's been chaired by Sergei Stepeshin, former FSB director.
Oh, okay. Not exactly subtle.
Not really, and they mention a Greek national tied to the FSB, Simos Panagiotidis, who had a role in occupied Kherson and was a leader in the society, shows how seemingly cultural or historical groups can have deep intel connections.
And those Immortal Regiment events we see. Parades with photos.
Absolutely, part of it. These pro-Russian events, remembering WWII relatives, they're used to push Russian nationalism, justify current actions.
So projecting a specific version of history globally.
Exactly. Keep the narrative alive, keep the influence going.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. The Russian Orthodox Church. The report makes some pretty strong claims about its role.
Yeah, this is a really significant dimension. The report basically says the ROC isn't just a religious body.
More than that.
Much more. It functions as a strategic arm of the Russian state, pushing Kremlin ideology, spreading disinformation. They pretty much call it an extension of the FSB.
An extension of the FSB.
Wow. How? Well, partly through ideology, fostering submissiveness, preaching hierarchical obedience. Women obey men, men obey priests. Priests' authority is absolute, God-given.
Cultivating obedience.
Right, which aligns perfectly with Kremlin control. And there's the narrative of Russian supremacy Moscow as the spiritual center, dominant over other Orthodox groups. We saw this used in the Balkans, Georgia, Ukraine.
To create division. Justify intervention.
Exactly. It exacerbates splits, provides a pretext.
And it's not just ideas, is it? The report hints at, well, more direct operational stuff.
Definitely. Key ROC figures act as agents of influence, obvious messaging, but also subtler manipulation.
In monasteries.
Suggested they can be intel hubs, sanctuaries for espionage, maybe easier vetting for novices or pilgrims.
Did some settling.
There are even reports of military-style Orthodox camps in the U.S. In the case of Daniel Martindale, used his cover as a devout Christian doing charity work. to spy for Russia. Shows how religious trust can be exploited. Plus, other reports suggest ROC churches in Europe might be used for espionage across the continent.
That paints a really disturbing picture. What about more conventional tools? Culture, diplomacy.
Well, the report notes big-name artists might be too high profile for direct spying.
Too much scrutiny.
Right. But their agents could be operatives.
Hmm.
And art itself is a huge propaganda tool. Cultural centers, exhibitions, films, all can be co-opted.
Is shaping the narrative.
And weaponizing nostalgia. Using old Soviet films on YouTube to target the diaspora, rekindle those old emotional ties.
Trouble.
And then, of course, you have diplomats, military attachés, often acting as agents of influence, using their official cover for intel gathering, spreading disinformation, embassies as hubs for covert ops.
It's just layer upon layer, isn't it? Hitting
Yeah.
so many different areas. What about politics in other countries? Do they try to influence that directly?
Oh, absolutely. The FSB invests in struggling political parties, media outlets, revives them to amplify marginal voices.
Who do they target?
Politicians may be past their prime, but still with some connections. They're prime recruitment targets. The report mentions Voice of Europe.
The media outlet.
Yeah, pro-Kremlin, used to funnel, reportedly, large sums of money to far-right politicians across Europe.
Why?
To spread Kremlin propaganda, boost pro-Russian candidates, especially ahead of things like EU elections.
So, cultivating sympathetic voices right inside other countries' political systems.
That's the aim. And it's not just politicians. It's manipulating information using so-called experts.
How does that work?
You have hired influencers, maybe posing as journalists, publishing articles to sway public opinion.
What kind of articles?
A common one is arguing that sanctions against Russia will just hurt Western economies, cause hardship.
To create public pressure.
Exactly. Pressure governments to lift sanctions, stop supporting Ukraine. The SBU apparently even got hold of FSB manuals on how to get proper coverage in foreign media.
Manuals. Seriously.
Yeah, all aimed at creating internal pressure on Western governments. And the US DOJ has gone after groups like Tenet Media for allegedly spreading Kremlin disinformation online.
Just a constant stream of disinformation,
Yep.
trying to weaken resolve, sow division.
And the report also covers more direct destabilization tactics, exploiting existing fractures in society.
How so?
The Kremlin apparently does deep analysis of social dynamics, finds the fault lines, ethnic, religious, economic, whatever,
Voice spots.
and then applies pressure, introduces divisive narratives, fuels arguments, escalates tension.
Got example.
The Elves mentioned deflection as a key tactic, like the farmers' protests on the Poland-Ukraine border.
Right, I remember that.
False claims were spread, Ukrainian refugees draining Poland's budget. It diverted attention from real economic issues, created a scapegoat, classic divide and conquer,
And more direct methods?
attempted assassinations, classic mafia state tactic. Instill fear, send a message.
And all this plays out online, too, I assume.
Hugely. The virtual realm is a major battlefield. Kremlin strategists wage psychological warfare online.
Bot networks.
Massive bot networks, saturating social media, shaping narrative, amplifying the disinformation. They even rent or buy old accounts.
To make the bots look real.
Exactly. Gives them a history, makes them more convincing. And platforms like Viber, Telegram, especially popular in post-Soviet countries, are heavily used too.
So it's physical and virtual.
The Elves emphasize this. The physical war is happening, but the real battle might be for collective consciousness, for public opinion.
The report ends on a pretty grim note, doesn't it? About the fundamental mindset.
Very grim. The Elves warn that if the Russian world expands, the violence will be incomparable, because the worldview is just totally different.
Incomparable.
Yeah. They tell this story about Russian troops being genuinely outraged by the living standards they saw in Ukrainian villages.
Outraged. Why?
Because it was so much better than what they had. It illustrates this potential rage, they think, that could be directed at Europe. And they call Russia a deal-dead entity, basically incapable of honoring agreements.
Like playing chess with a crocodile.
That's the analogy they used, yeah. Their view is Russia operates outside the law, only understands force, like confronting a thug in an alley.
Show weakness and they pounce.
That's the idea. And the final warning is stark. Russian sleeper agents are everywhere, globally, silently eroding things from within.
Okay, so the big takeaway here for listeners from this deep dive, it really seems to be the sheer breadth and persistence of these Russian infiltration tactics.
Absolutely. It's not just military threats. It's this long-term global campaign to destabilize democracies from the inside out. multifaceted.
And Ukraine's experience through the eyes of these elves, it offers crucial lessons for the rest of us, doesn't it?
Vital lessons. In how to spot these threats, how to counter them, we really need to understand the long game Russia's playing and these, well, unconventional methods.
Definitely gives us a lot to think about. You know, considering all these different methods,
Ah.
it makes you wonder, doesn't it? What are some subtle ways this might already be impacting our own information, our own communities, even if it's not obvious?
Just a really important question to ask.
Yeah, thinking about those long-term effects of these sort of silent forms of influence, something to